Up didn't always mean freedom. Once, the dungeon was the donjon, the highest, safest tower before centuries bent the word downward into a pit of fear. Tonight we climb from sunlight to stone, trace corners that cracked under siege, and peer into throat-black holes called oubliettes. What's architecture? What's myth? And how did a fortress of refuge become a byword for terror? Step inside. If I told you that the word dungeon once pointed upward to the tallest tower rather than downward into the dark, would you believe me? In medieval French, the donjon was the great keep, the lord's strongest refuge. In modern French, a cramped prison cell is a cachot, not cachat. Somewhere between languages and centuries, the keep that guarded people slowly became, in English imagination, the pit that swallowed them. Tonight, we'll walk the stairs from sunlight to stone, from the keep to the crawl space, and decide what's architectural truth and what's fear echoing through the walls. The story begins with walls thick, deliberate, and surprisingly clever. In the 11th century, early stone keeps were often square, brute geometry stacked upon bedrock. They were lords' houses as much as fortresses' halls, chapels, treasuries, and sometimes secure rooms for high-value captives. But as siegecraft sharpened rams, sappers, and engines that learned to focus shock a square corner became a liability. Force met angle. The angle cracked. By the 12th and 13th centuries, castles answered with round towers and curved flanks. A blow glances from a circle, undermining finds no neat seam. The keep remained the hard heart of the place, and when everything else failed, defenders sprinted there. If you had property to protect or a hostage to barter, the keep made sense. Strength wasn't cruelty in itself. It was insurance. Punishment in the earlier Middle Ages rarely meant an extended stay behind bars. Prisons are expensive. You must feed them, guard them, keep them. Law favored fines for the solvent, mutilation for the terrifyingly public lesson, and when rulers needed to make a point execution, war complicated the calculus. Nobles taken in the field were worth money and leverage, and you don't behead a bargaining chip. So you lodge him, sometimes decently, under watch. You write letters, you negotiate, you wait for gold to cross a sea. Lower status captives fared worse, especially in sieges and panics. A strong room with a single door and no friendly eyes could become a holding pen for a night or a week while commanders decided what to do next. Now picture the keep again, not as a cartoon prison, but as a layered building with very particular habits. Small windows, stone thick enough to carry winter like a memory. The soundscape is close. Boots, buckles, the scrape of a key. In a corner off a stair, a hatch sits flush with the floorboards, and below the hatch is a hole cut into darkness. It has a mouth and a throat, but no stairs, no door along the side, no pleasant landing. The only way in is from above, and the only way out is the same, at someone else's pleasure. Later centuries call this an oubliette, from the French oublier. To forget, though, medieval builders did not always use that word. They didn't need to. The design says it to your bones. Some oubliettes were narrow cylinders, barely big enough to turn. Others bulged, like bottles, wider at the bottom than the top. Damp collects where air cannot flow. Water drips, pooling ankle-deep, knee-deep, season depending. If a prior prisoner died down there, bone and cloth tell the tale. Was this common? Not in the cartoonish sense you sometimes hear at gift shops, but pits used as short-term confinement, terror, or punishment, yes, absolutely. Think of them as tools in a chest that also included iron shackles, barred rooms, and simple ropes. A jailer's aims were practical: immobilize, isolate, intimidate. We can hear the old stones speak if we listen case by case. Consider Pontefract Castle in Yorkshire. It rose in the Norman Age, grew into a baronial giant, and entered England's lore by the narrowest of doors: rumor and a dead king. In 1399, Henry Bolingbroke returned to England. His cousin, King Richard II, fell from power. Richard was moved north and died at Pontefract on 14 February 1400. Murder? Starvation? Politics can be quiet and lethal. The record is loud on the fact of death and careful about the method. Visual, present-day ruins dissolve into a painted reconstruction. A timeline creeps across the screen. Later, in the English Civil War, Oliver Cromwell endorsed the town's petition to demolish the fortress, and in 1649, the stones themselves were slighted, dragged down to erase power's memory. Somewhere beneath those surviving walls, chambers exist where light did not reach. Whether you call them dungeons or holds or pits, the lesson at Pontefract is not that every stone hole is myth, it's that certainty has to be earned, site by site. Far to the north, at St. Andrew's Castle on the Fife coast, the sea keeps counsel and the rock keeps secrets. Here, cut straight into the bedrock, sits a notorious bottle dungeon, roughly 20-something feet deep, narrow at the throat, swollen below, with air grudging at best. You lower in a body on a rope. You do not lower in a bed. A prisoner might be kept there to break his will before questioning, or as a punishment measured not in lashes but in hours of darkness that feel like days. People's names attached to it: David, Duke of Rothesay, who was held at St. Andrews in 1402 but died elsewhere. Murdoch Stewart, later executed not because every famous captive touched this one chamber, but because the chamber crystallizes a truth. Cold stone can be more eloquent than a list of rules. The Tower of London speaks in a dialect of dread. Beneath the White Tower, medieval and early modern sources remember a space known as Little Ease, so cramped that no posture offered relief. You could not stand straight, sit, or lie, only crouch. It functioned as an instrument of pressure, like a hand slowly closing. We know with certainty that the tower held prisoners who were interrogated and sometimes tortured. We know that Guy Fawkes was taken there in 1605 after the failed gunpowder plot. Whether he crouched in that exact pocket called Little Ease, or another like it, we cannot prove line by line, but the motif survives because it fits the institution's known methods. The world beyond England tells its own versions. On the European bank of the Bosphorus, the Ottomans built Rumeli Hisari in the mid-15th century, a fortress to throttle the strait and test Byzantium's last breath. It is honeycombed with passages, stairways, and voids, some called oubliettes by modern tours. The structural facts are simple. Blind wall chambers and deep pits exist. The label is another matter. Oubliette is a French convenience. The function drop and forget is the universal heart of the idea. We should be cautious, not because cruelty stops at borders, but because terminology runs away from context if we let it. Now back to Wales, where Conwy Castle lifts ringed towers above the river like a crown. Leading off the Great Hall is a prison tower, and below it, a rock-cut pit about 12 feet deep entered only from above. The message is plain. A single aperture concentrates control. At Pembroke, narratives tell of a 15th century captive deprived of clothing and light until blindness joined his punishments. Can we footnote every detail? Not always. But pits of this sort are there, hewn into the stone, and they are not hospitable, whatever the century. Across the Irish Sea, Leap Castle haunts the folkloric imagination, a narrow shaft beside a chapel where 20th century renovations reportedly found a press of human remains 3 cartloads, as the tale goes, and even spikes fixed in the floor. Here we must keep a steady hand. A shaft existed. Bones were found, according to contemporary reports. The spiked oubliette has become a brand in ghost stories, and brands have a way of selling you more certainty than the sources allow. This is the rhythm of the medieval carceral world, practical architecture dressed in the costume of terror. And terror was part of the point. Imagine the psychology. You are hauled down a stair lit by one torch. An iron ring bites your wrist. The floor opens. A trapdoor yawns. You smell water that has forgotten the Sunday. The rope lowers you into a throat of stone, and when the knot jerks and you sway, the world above is a coin of light. Then the coin slides away. SFX. Trapdoor, shut hard metallic slam. Darkness swallows the reverb. In such a place, time ceases to be counted in hours. It is counted in drops and in the negotiations of your mind with the walls. Not every prisoner lived like this. Many high-born captives slept in chambers with beds and shutters, with guards at the door and books to pass the time. Their value required it. But even they might be threatened with something worse, and the threat alone could move mountains in a confession. The oubliette, then, is less a standard room on a floor plan and more a tool of last resort, a reminder that in societies where public shame and bodily pain were routine sentences, deliberate sensory deprivation was a cruelty peers understood at once, and unlike lash marks or severed fingers, it left little to display. You step out from darkness after 2 days and insist you will talk. The bruise is in your sleep, not on your skin. Let's walk the memory of language once more, because words are the timbers that hold up everything else. The keep the donjon was safety, height, lineage. Over time, English storytellers borrowed the syllables and changed the soul. Dungeon, in popular mind, moved underfoot. Part of that shift is practical. As keeps absorb responsibility for security, their most inaccessible corners naturally doubled as holding spaces. Part is theatrical. Later centuries loved to imagine medieval cruelty as both omnipresent and mechanically inventive. The truth lives in the middle. A keep is not a cartoon. It is a house built out of fear's lessons. A pit is not a myth. It is a hole you can still lean over and smell. There's also the commerce of fear. Tourists love goosebumps. Brochures love superlatives. You'll hear sometimes of thousands tortured in a single castle, their bones counted in round numbers that fit a headline. We must be frank. Border wars were merciless. Raiding and reprisals could be dreadful. But cold figures like 7,500 dead in one keep almost always stretch anecdotes into legend. Historians do the slower work, tallying payments, reading warders' accounts, checking if a supposed chamber existed when a supposed prisoner lived. The more lurid the claim, the more your eyebrow should tilt. The lesson embedded in skepticism is not to deny cruelty. It is to describe it faithfully, so that we honor the people who suffered by not turning their pain into theater. So what did medieval imprisonment look like on an average day? A corridor of smells, tallow, damp straw, sweat, a bucket's indignities, footfalls that matter because they tell you someone is coming. A key that scrapes a ring like a bell. In a keep's upper chamber, a noble underwatch may receive letters and bread and stew, a man of rank locked inside the rituals of rank. In the undercroft or a cut pit, a nameless captive measures time with thirst. Somewhere, a clerk writes a line in a book about ransom or delivery. Somewhere else, a carpenter checks the hinges of a hatch. The system is not uniform, and that unevenness is the point. Punishment in the period is personal, relational, and negotiated. The architecture rooms, rings, and pits simply gives rulers a vocabulary of control, and that vocabulary changes across the centuries. As Europe slides from the high medieval into the early modern, states centralize. Bureaucracy thickens. Prisons emerge as more defined institutions. Interrogations take on paperwork. The Tower of London becomes a symbol as much as a place. Fortresses like Rumeli Hizari convert from strategic choke points to romantic relics. The myths that accrete over time, spikes in every floor, mass graves beneath every stair, are a kind of anxiety about power set loose from its immediate context. They are revealing, but not always about the Middle Ages themselves. Let's return for a last time to the moment the hatch swings and a body descends. Visual, point of view from below the aperture is a bright wound in the ceiling. You do not need sensational gore to understand what this does to a mind. The oubliette's cruelty is mathematical. A vertical shaft, a human frame, a deprivation of choice. If a guard returns with a rope, you will take the bargain offered. If he does not, the whole lives up to its name. The architecture punishes without spectacle. That's why it terrifies. There's no audience, only stone. When we film ruins today, we love a drone shot, a slow reveal, a candle guttering, and a shot that lingers. Those images are beautiful. They're also invitations to listen better. Visual. Drone pulls up from a ruined keep to show its footprint within a modern town. Inside every donjon turned dungeon story is a lesson about how societies manage risk, contain enemies, and tell themselves who deserves mercy. The keep began as a promise: thick walls, fewer windows, a height from which to see danger coming. The oubliette is the underside of that promise. If a society builds absolute safety for some, it will likely build absolute helplessness for others. The same stone can remember both. So, the next time you stand on a castle hill and feel the wind push your coat, look for the pragmatic details before the grisly ones. Ask where the grain was stored, where the water was lifted, where the Lord's family slept. Ask where a messenger would wait for an audience, and where a chained prisoner would fear to be taken. And if a guide offers you a number that sounds pleasingly horrible, let your curiosity be the sharper blade. You can love a good ghost story and still insist on a footnote. We began with a word that wandered. Donjon, the strong, central tower drifting into dungeon, the pit, and the legend. On the way down the stair, we passed a square corner rounded by fear, a door inside a door, a shaft whose purpose was to remove choices from the body lowered into it. We met a dead king whose cause of death still argues in the parchment, a bottle of rock with air like a fist, a cramped niche whose name, Little Ease, tells you everything, and a fortress on a strait where a language borrowed the shape of a terror and made it French. The Middle Ages do not need exaggeration. They need attention. They give you enough: stone, water, law, leverage, night. Words wander, but stones keep their promises. If you'd like more history that separates the stone from the story without losing the drama that makes the past breathe, subscribe and tap the bell. We release new episodes every week. Until then, keep your eyes on the walls and your mind on the sources.